The Great Hall of the Galactic Council was a monument to unity, its towering pillars, carved from the stones of 100 worlds, its ceiling, an endless expanse of holographic stars, shimmering with the constellations of every species that called the galaxy home. But today that unity was unraveling today, the hall was filled not with the hopeful discussions of cooperation, but with the rising storm of disbelief and fear. At the center of it all stood the human ambassador, tall, unwavering, his face carved from stone, his uniform pristine and unblemished by the desperation that swirled around him. Before him, the great circular table of the council was alive with flickering holograms, each representing a different species from across the stars, some reptilian, some avian, some nothing that could be described with human words, all of them speaking at once, shouting, pleading, demanding answers, demanding explanations. "This is absurd," said the Zorathian High Chancellor, his insectoid mandibles kicking in agitation. "Humanity has been the backbone of interstellar governance. For centuries, your fleets maintain the peace, your diplomats resolve our disputes, your economy stabilizes our trade routes. You cannot just leave, you cannot abandon your responsibilities." The human ambassador did not flinch, did not blink. His eyes swept across the chamber, taking in the desperate expressions of creatures who had grown far too comfortable under humanity's watchful eye. He did not revel in their panic, but neither did he pity them. They had been warned again and again. "Humanity withdraws effective immediately." His voice was calm, controlled, the words cut through the cacophony like a blade. "We will no longer participate in council affairs. We will no longer enforce your treaties. We will no longer mediate your disputes." The silence that followed was deafening. It lasted only seconds before chaos erupted. The Thranox warlord slammed a clawed fist against the table, his armored exoskeleton gleaming under the artificial lights. "If this is some kind of power play, we will not be intimidated. Humanity's strength is vast, but so is ours." The Yilvani diplomat, a being of flowing translucent tendrils pulsing with bioluminescent light, raised a softer voice. "This is a mistake. Without your intervention, war will break out across a dozen systems. Our alliances will collapse. Entire civilizations could fall." "That is not our concern anymore," the ambassador replied. The words sent a ripple of shock through the room. The representatives turned to one another, their unease growing. The council chamber had seen its share of debates, of arguments, of heated conflicts, but always there had been the unshakable presence of humanity to hold it all together, to ensure that no matter how fierce the disagreements, no matter how close the galaxy came to war, it never quite crossed the line. But now the line was gone. The Zorathian Chancellor leaned forward, his multifaceted eyes narrowing, his voice dropping into something low and dangerous. "We need to understand why." The ambassador stared at him for a long moment, and then he answered, "Because you never listened." Without another word, he turned and walked away, his boots echoing against the polished floor. As he left the great hall behind the holograms, flickered the voices rose again in frantic disbelief. But he did not look back. He did not need to. He already knew what would happen next. At first, the galaxy hesitated, as if waiting for humanity to change its mind, waiting for the silent fleets to return, waiting for the ambassadors to step back into the great hall and tell them that it had all been some kind of elaborate warning. But humanity did not return. No messages came, no explanations were given. The humans simply vanished behind their impenetrable borders. Their worlds sealed, their ships withdrawing from every known system. And for a moment, the universe stood in stunned silence. Then the opportunists made their move. The Zorathian Dominion struck first. Their war fleets surged into disputed territories, clawing away resource-rich worlds that had long been protected by human-brokered treaties. They had been waiting for this moment, waiting for the day humanity's watchful eye was no longer there to restrain them. Entire planets surrendered without a fight. Their leaders, knowing that without human intervention, no aid would come, no fleets would arrive to liberate them. The Dominion expanded swiftly without opposition. The Thrakna clans followed suit, their blood feuds, long kept in check by human-enforced peace treaties, reignited with a vengeance. Warships, painted in the colors of ancient rivalries, descended upon border worlds. Massacres erupted as old grudges filled into the void, and still humanity did not return. On the other side of the galaxy, the Velari aristocracy saw a different opportunity. They did not seek war, they sought profit. With humanity gone, they tightened their control over vital trade routes, raising tariffs, choking out weaker economies, and bankrupting entire systems within weeks. Smaller nations found themselves cut off, unable to sustain themselves without the stabilizing economic force that humanity had once provided. Desperate pleas for assistance were met with silence. The Valari grew richer, the poor grew weaker, and the universe trembled. The Galactic Council convened emergency meetings, sending urgent transmissions to human space pleading for intervention, but no answer came. Some council members still believed that humanity would return, that the humans were simply waiting for the galaxy to beg for their presence. But others knew better. They understood what humanity's final words had meant, because you never listened. The humans had spent centuries warning that stability required effort, that peace was not self-sustaining, that balance did not last without those willing to uphold it. And now the galaxy was learning just how right humanity had been. Within months, the cracks widened. Piracy surged with no fear of human patrols. Raiders, once kept in check by humanity's overwhelming military presence, now ran rampant. Entire colonies disappeared into slavery. Trade convoys vanished without a trace. Distress beacons flickered unanswered. The weak became prey. The strong turned on each other, and still humanity did not return. On a distant world far from the chaos, an old historian watched the news feeds from his quiet study, watching as the galaxy tore itself apart. He had studied human history, he had read their warnings, and now he saw the inevitable conclusion unfolding before his eyes. They had all believed that humanity needed them, that the humans participated in galactic politics because they wished to be part of something greater, but they had been wrong. It had never been about humanity needing the galaxy. It had always been about the galaxy needing humanity, and now without them everything was falling apart. At first the wars were small border skirmishes, disputes over mining colonies, trade routes, forgotten ancestral claims. But without humanity to enforce peace, they escalated faster than anyone could have imagined. The Zorathian Dominion was the first to overreach. Their fleets, having expanded too quickly, found themselves stretched thin. Rebellions broke out on newly conquered worlds, resistance movements armed by desperate factions who had once been allies of humanity struck back with ruthless efficiency. Entire Dominion fleets vanished in ambushes. Space stations burned. The Zorathian High Chancellor declared total war against all insurgents, but the moment they did, the Thraknar clans saw their chance. The Thraknar had always been warriors, their kind thrived in conflict, and now with the Dominion overextended, they launched their full strength into the heart of Zorathian space planets, fell in days, their war cries echoing across the void, no longer bound by treaties, no longer held back by fear of human retaliation. They fought like nothing else mattered. The galaxy watched in horror as the Dominion fractured into chaos. But the wars were not confined to the Dominion. The Valari aristocracy, tightening its grip on interstellar trade, now found itself under siege. Their rivals, emboldened by the collapse of order, launched raids on Valari holdings. Economic war turned into actual war, and soon their once thriving empire of commerce was drowning in blood. Corporate warlords emerged, shattering the carefully controlled markets as factions turned on each other. Betrayals became commonplace. Ships carrying resources vanished as trade disputes turned to outright blockades. Entire planets dependent on Valari imports starved with no human relief efforts to stabilize their economies. Famine swept through countless systems. Pirates thrived in the chaos. Whole fleets of them, no longer fearing human patrols, attacked colonies and stations without mercy. They struck deep into vulnerable territories, their ships modified with captured technology from the countless broken treaties of all their leaders, many of them former mercenaries who once worked under human oversight, now ruled as kings over lawless sectors. Entire planets fell to them, forced into servitude to fuel their growing criminal empires. With humanity gone, no one could stop them. The Galactic Council, powerless without human enforcement, tried to broker peace, but every attempt ended in failure. Trust was gone. Suspicion ruled diplomacy. The council meetings, once filled with the voices of 1,000 species, were now emptying fast. Representatives abandoned their posts, retreating to their homeworlds, hoping to save their own people from the oncoming storm. On the outer rim, colonies that had flourished under human protection now lay abandoned, their inhabitants fleeing to the core worlds, seeking safety that no longer existed. Refugee fleets clogged the hyperspace lanes, drifting between systems that refused them entry, fearing they would bring more war, starvation, disease. Despair, the illusion of civilization was crumbling, and no one knew how to stop it. In the silent void just beyond the chaos, human ships watched from the darkness, massive, unyielding, their weapons, idle, their engines cold. They observed, recorded, waited. The leaders of the galaxy had always thought humanity was involved in their affairs out of necessity, but they had never realized the truth. Humanity had never needed the galaxy had needed humanity, and now it was learning that lesson in fire and blood. The galaxy was bleeding. Entire sectors had become war zones. Civilizations that had once thrived under the stability humanity provided were collapsing under their own weight. The Zorethian Dominion, now locked in a brutal war with the Thraknar clans, was losing ground faster than it could recover. Its fleets stretched thin, its supply lines severed, its leaders assassinated by rebels who had once been forced into peace by human diplomacy. The Thraknar warlords, emboldened by their success, pushed deeper into Dominion space. Their fleets were unstoppable, tearing through planets, leaving only destruction in their wake. The Dominion Chancellor pleaded for aid from the Galactic Council, but there was no council left. Not really. Its members had scattered, too busy saving their own homeworlds to intervene. The Velari aristocracy, once the economic superpower of the universe, was in ruins. Their vast network of trade monopolies shattered by infighting and rebellion. Their once loyal corporate vassals had turned on them in desperation, seizing assets, hoarding resources. Entire star systems were plunged into famine as vital shipments failed to arrive. Riots erupted on countless worlds. Governments crumbled, and the Velari rulers, who had thought themselves untouchable, were being hunted down by the very people they had once exploited. The refugees had nowhere to go, millions of them drifting through space in broken vessels, seeking shelter that no one could provide. In the past, humanity had always been the answer. Their colonies had been sanctuaries, their resources a safety net. But now the human borders were sealed, their defenses impenetrable. No one got in, no one got out. Desperate factions turned to old forbidden weapons. Superweapons, long outlawed under human oversight, were now being rediscovered. Entire planets were wiped from existence by ancient doomsday devices that should have remained buried. Biological plagues, designed for war, unleashed on enemy populations, killing trillions with no cure. Wars that had once been fought over resources were now fought for survival, and species that had existed for millennia were vanishing in the span of weeks. The pirates grew bolder, no longer content with raiding isolated outposts. They now targeted major worlds. Entire governments fell to criminal warlords. Civilizations that had once stood proud under the rule of law were now ruled by syndicates and slavers, and still humanity did not return. On the outskirts of human space, the largest refugee fleet ever assembled drifted just beyond the border. Thousands of ships carrying what remained of dying civilizations, their leaders broadcasting endless pleas for mercy, for sanctuary, for anything. A single human vessel arrived, massive, ominous, its dark hull reflecting the last dying light of a collapsing galaxy. The refugees cheered, thinking salvation had finally come. But when the transmissions came, they were not words of comfort, they were a warning. Humanity does not interfere, your fate is your own. And then the ship left, disappearing back into the void, as if they'd never been there. Hope died that day across the universe. Species that had spent centuries relying on humanity realized the truth. They had never been equals to the humans. They had been children being watched over, protected from themselves. And now the parents were gone, and the children were burning. The galaxy was dying, and no one could stop it. Deep within, human space fleets sat idle. Rows upon rows of warships lined the darkness, their hulls unblemished, their weapons silent, the most advanced armada the galaxy had ever known, unmoving, untouched, watching. Behind them, their worlds thrived, untouched by the chaos that gripped the rest of the universe. Human colonies were fortified, self-sustaining. Their people lived in peace, their industries flourished, their skies were clear of war. But beyond their borders, the galaxy screamed and burned, and still humanity did nothing. They observed, recorded, waited. Messages continued to flood their comms, desperate pleas from species that had once called them ally civilizations that had dismissed their warnings now begged for their return. Some leaders offered riches, others swore loyalty. All of them promised that they had changed, that they had learned their lesson, that they would never again take humanity for granted, if only they would intervene, if only they would save them. But humanity remained silent. On the edge of human space, an armada gathered the last remnants of the Galactic Council, or what was left of its species that had once wielded influence. Now little more than refugees assembled their remaining warships, battered fleets, filled with survivors of lost homeworlds. They were not here to beg, not anymore. They had come with a final ultimatum. A transmission was sent to the heart of human space. The face of the Zorethian warlord, who had seized control of the council, appeared, his insectoid features, gaunt, his voice, filled with desperation and rage. Humanity, you will no longer ignore us. You cannot sit in your fortresses. While the universe collapses, we will not allow it. We demand your aid. And if you refuse, we will break through your borders and take it ourselves. Silence. Then a response came, not from a diplomat, not from a politician, but from a simple automated transmission. Entry denied. The warlord slammed a fist against his control panel, fury overtaking reason enough. He roared, "We attack at dawn." His fleet surged forward, crossing into human space, weapons, prime shields raised ready for the battle that would decide the fate of the galaxy. They expected resistance, they expected war, they expected a fight to prove humanity was still mortal, still vulnerable. But what they received was something else entirely. The first human ships appeared without warning, no alarms, no signals, no visible weapons, just cold black vessels emerging from the void surrounding the invading fleet. Before they could react, before they could fire a single shot, they were gone, wiped from existence, as if they had never been there. No wreckage, no distress signals, no survivors. One moment, there was an armada, the next there was nothing. Across the universe, the message spread: humanity was no longer the peacekeeper, no longer the diplomat, no longer the overseer. They were something else now, something colder, something absolute. And for the first time in history, the galaxy understood humanity had not abandoned them out of weakness. They had done it because they had already decided that the galaxy was not worth saving. Word spread like wildfire. The fleet was gone, not defeated, not repelled, simply erased. Entire species listened in horror as the details emerged. No distress signals, no battle reports, no debris. It was as if the ships had never existed. Their crews, their leaders, their warlords, all wiped from reality by a force no one could comprehend. Panic gripped the remaining civilizations. Those who had once plotted against humanity now trembled. In fear, those who had once mocked their warnings now whispered prayers to gods. They had long abandoned the galaxy, had been prepared for a war with humans. They had been ready to fight, resist, struggle against what they thought was just another power. But this was not war. This was extermination. This was something beyond their understanding. The Velari aristocracy fractured. Their once proud houses turned on each other in a desperate bid to survive. The most powerful among them fled into the void, seeking refuge in the lawless territories, hoping that if they could vanish into the chaos, humanity would not follow them. Their people were left behind, abandoned to famine, riots, and the anarchy they themselves had created. The Zorethian dominion, what little remained of it, collapsed overnight. Their armies disbanded, their warlords disappeared, the throne world fell into silence as its ruling coast simply ceased to exist. No one knew if humanity had struck them down or if they had taken their own lives. Rather than face the unknown, either way, the result was the same. Dominion space became a wasteland of ungoverned planets, lost colonies, and terrified refugees with nowhere left to go. The Thraknar clans, once so bloodthirsty, so eager for battle, suddenly found themselves without an enemy. The Dominion was gone, their war had no purpose, their conquests meaningless, and worse, they now understood the true weight of their actions. They had cheered when humanity left the council, had celebrated when the peacekeepers abandoned their posts, but now they saw the truth. Humanity had not stepped away because they were weak. They had stepped away because they no longer saw the galaxy as worth saving. On the farthest reaches of known space, a desperate alliance formed. The last surviving leaders of a dozen species, gathered in secret, hidden from prying eyes. They had once ruled with arrogance, believing themselves to be masters of diplomacy, trade, and war. Now they sat in dimly lit chambers, speaking in hushed tones. The question that none of them wanted to ask lingered in the air. What if humanity was not just watching? What if they were waiting for what? Asked a trembling voice from the shadows. The answer was clear: judgment. Across the stars, those who had once been conquerors, who had fought over human-protected lands, who had enslaved, massacred, and exploited, now looked to the void with dread. Was humanity planning something, or had they already decided and was simply letting the galaxy tear itself apart on its own? No one knew, and that was the worst part of all. The galaxy was crumbling. Entire civilizations lay in ruin. Those who had once ruled now scavenged among the wreckage of their own empires. The strong had devoured the weak, only to find themselves starving in the end. Trade had collapsed. War had consumed everything. Even the pirates who had once thrived in the chaos now found themselves without victims to prey upon. There was nothing left to steal. No convoys, no supply lines, no stability. Even for criminals, lawlessness had reached its peak, and now the only thing left was silence. But the silence was not peaceful. It was suffocating, the kind that came before an execution. The few remaining leaders, those who had not been assassinated or abandoned by their own people, whispered among themselves in secret councils, trying to understand what humanity wanted. The humans had made no demands. They had not annexed territory. They had not enslaved the defeated. They had simply left and watched and waited. But waited for what? The unanswered question was a noose tightening around the neck of the universe. No one dared act, not anymore. The destruction of the Zorethian fleet had proven that resistance was meaningless. An entire armada erased without warning, without response, without so much as a declaration of war. It was not war humanity waged now. It was something else entirely, something colder, something absolute. Some tried to reach out again, desperate messages sent into the void pleading for mercy. They confessed their sins, they promised change, they swore they had learned their lesson. But the messages received no reply. It was as if humanity was no longer listening. Or perhaps they had already made their decision. On the fringes of known space, an ancient race, one that had remained neutral for eons, finally spoke. The Ilthari scholars, their wisdom spanning longer than most species had even existed, had observed humanity from the beginning, had watched as the others dismissed their warnings, had watched as they were used as enforcers, and then discarded once they were no longer convenient. And now the Ilthari gave their own warning. Humanity is not like us, they said. We build empires, we seek power, we crave influence. But they do not, they never did. They are something older, something different. They were not part of this galaxy, they only existed within it. And we mistook their patience for weakness, their mercy for need, their diplomacy for dependence. The other races listened in uneasy silence. Humanity never needed us, the Ilthari continued, but we needed them, and now they are gone, not in body, but in spirit. They have left us to our fate, and fate is cruel to those who squander their second chances. Panic spread among those who still ruled, fractured. Though their power was, some demanded action, others called for surrender, but surrender to what? To whom humanity had made no claims, had spoken no words, had issued no terms. They had simply withdrawn and waited, and in their absence, the galaxy had destroyed itself. And then, for the first time in years, a human transmission was received. One sentence, no more, no less. Judgment is coming. The transmission echoed across the remnants of the galactic network, bouncing from dying relay stations to shattered capitals to war-torn outposts. Judgment is coming. No further messages followed, no clarifications, no explanations, no warnings, just those three words. Across the universe, fear gripped every remaining leader, every warlord, every surviving government species that had once ruled with arrogance now cowered in dread. Some tried to flee, loading their last ships with what little wealth they had left, seeking refuge beyond known space. But there was no refuge, there was nowhere to go, no one to turn to. The galaxy had burned itself down to ash, and now it was too late to rebuild, too late to beg for mercy. Some tried to fight. In their desperation, they gathered whatever remained of their fleets, rallying their soldiers for a last stand against an enemy they did not understand. They stationed warships at every border, pointed their weapons into the void, waiting for the storm to break, waiting for the moment humanity would strike. But deep down they knew it was useless. Humanity had never needed fleets to destroy them. They had proven that with the Zorethian armada. Some simply accepted their fate. Entire worlds fell silent. Leaders resigned. Governments collapsed. Societies that had stood for millennia simply ceased to function as their people waited for the inevitable. And then the stars darkened. Humanity arrived without sound, without warning. They did not emerge from hyperspace in great formations. They did not announce their presence with fanfare or threats. They simply appeared, as if they had always been there, their ships black monoliths against the void, thousands of them, tens of thousands, an uncountable number, stretching across the abyss, larger than any fleet ever assembled. They did not fire. They did not move. They did nothing. The galaxy held its breath, waiting for judgment to come. On the bridge of a failing station, a Vaylari noble watched the human fleet through cracked viewports, his breath shallow, his body shaking beside him. His advisors whispered possibilities, strategies, desperate plans to surrender, to negotiate, to run. But he knew there was no point. There had never been a point. Humanity had already made its decision long ago. Across the former Dominion space, Thraknar warlords stood upon the ruins of conquered cities, staring up at the black ships that filled their skies, their hands clenched around their weapons. But they did not raise them. For the first time in their blood-soaked history, they had nothing left to fight. On the last hidden council world, the surviving members of the once mighty Galactic Council gathered in their great hall, awaiting a message, an envoy, anything, but nothing came. The ships simply loomed above them, silent, unyielding, patient. It was not an invasion, it was not a battle. There were no demands, no ultimatums, no declarations of conquest. Humanity did not act like conquerors because they were not here to conquer. They were here to pass judgment. Then the first world vanished. One moment it was there, a scarred but living planet, filled with billions of desperate souls. The next it was gone, erased, not destroyed, not burned, not turned to rubble, just gone, erased, as if it had never existed at all. Panic turned to madness. Fleets fired blindly into the abyss, weapons launched at the silent ships. But the moment they did, those worlds, those fleets, those species disappeared too. Humanity did not retaliate, did not explain, did not acknowledge their fear. They simply erased those who had chosen to resist, those who had chosen war, those who had brought chaos. And then, just as suddenly as they had arrived, the human fleet stopped. A final transmission echoed through the void. The choice has been made. The message spread across the dying galaxy, a whisper through the ruins of empires, a final decree that none could escape. The choice has been made. There was no explanation, no details, no conditions. Those who still lived, those who still watched from the last broken remnants of their civilizations, understood humanity had spoken, judgment had been passed, and there was nothing left to do but wait. Silence consumed the stars. The black ships of humanity remained in position, unmoving, watching, waiting. No one knew what would come next. No one dared to move, speak, act. Some leaders tried one last desperate attempt at diplomacy, sending transmissions, offering servitude, offering their people, their planets, their very existence in exchange for mercy, but no reply ever came. Then one by one the ships began to vanish, disappearing into the darkness, the way they had come, slipping away like ghosts, leaving nothing behind, not a single trace, not a single explanation, just the quiet hum of a galaxy teetering on the edge of oblivion. For days, for weeks, the remaining worlds lived in fear, waiting for the next world to disappear, waiting for the final stroke of judgment. But no more planets were erased, no more fleets were destroyed. It was over, not in fire, not in destruction, but in absence. Humanity had done what no empire had ever done before. They had simply walked away. The universe was broken in their wake. The last remnants of the once mighty Galactic Council, now little more than scattered factions hiding in the shadows, the Vaylari aristocracy, shattered forever, their vast wealth meaningless, in a universe where trade no longer existed. The Thraknar clans, who had once thrived on bloodshed, now faced only the ghosts of their own, making the warlords, the tyrants, the conquerors, all left to rot in the ruins of what they had built. But some still remained. Small colonies, forgotten outposts, lost settlements, those who had never taken part in the great games of power, those who had lived on the edges of empire, untouched by war or greed, these scattered survivors now found themselves in a galaxy without rulers, without order, without laws, and for the first time in history, the stars belonged to no one. Some saw it as a death sentence, a slow, inevitable decline into extinction, without the infrastructure, without the trade routes, without the stability that had once been maintained by human oversight. Entire species would fade into nothingness, their legacies lost to the passage of time. But others saw something else, a chance. A chance to start again, to rebuild, not as rulers, not as conquerors, not as empires desperate to claw their way to dominance, but as something new, something different, those who had learned, those who had suffered, those who had seen firsthand what arrogance had wrought, gathered in secret, speaking in hushed voices, whispering of a future where they did not repeat the mistakes of the past. They would never hear from humanity again. They all knew this humanity had done what it had come to do, and now it was gone, vanished beyond the veil of its own borders, content to let the galaxy rise or fall on its own. But the lesson they had left behind would never be forgotten. The age of galactic empires was over. The era of warlords and conquest had come to an end. The species that remained were not rulers, they were not conquerors, they were survivors. And this time they would have to find their own way through the stars.